In the hot heat of a Babylonian palace in the summer of 323 BC, a 32-year-old king lay dying. His body, scarred by a dozen battles, was finally failing. Surrounding his bed, his desperate generals leaned in, asking to whom he would leave an empire that he had built and conquered across 3 continents, extending from the mountains of Greece to the rivers of India. With his final breaths, he whispered a phrase that would doom his world to decades of war: "To the strongest." To understand how a single human being pushed the boundaries of history so far, and how his relentless ambition eventually consumed him, we have to look back 30 years. The story begins in 356 BC, in the rough, mountainous kingdom of Macedonia, located in the northern reaches of ancient Greece. To the city-states of Athens and Sparta to the south, the Macedonians were viewed as half-barbarians, uncultured people who drank their wine unmixed with water and spent their lives fighting hill tribes. But Macedonia was transforming, driven by the ruthless, intelligent man, Alexander's father, King Philip II. Philip was a military genius who was on the verge of turning his kingdom into a world power. He reshaped warfare by creating the Macedonian phalanx, a tightly packed infantry formation armed with 18-foot-long spears called sarissas. Facing this formation was like walking into a moving wall of iron spikes. It is technically impossible to defeat. While Philip provided Alexander, his son, with the machinery of war, his mother, Olympias, provided the fire of his hunger ambition. Olympias was a princess from the neighboring kingdom of Epirus, and ancient historians describe her as a fierce, deeply spiritual woman who kept tamed snakes in her bedchamber and practiced mystical religious rites. She fiercely protected her son and whispered into his ear from a very young age that he was no ordinary boy. She told him that his true ancestor was the mythical hero named Achilles, and some legends even claimed she told him his real father was not Philip, but Zeus, the king of the gods. Alexander grew up believing he was born for greatness, destined to become great and accomplish things that his father could not. As a boy, Alexander was fearless. History remembers a famous moment when a majestic, untamable horse named Bucephalus was brought to King Philip. The animal was wild, rebelling and kicking at anyone who approached. While older men gave up, young Alexander noticed something they had missed. The horse was fearful of its own shadow dancing on the ground. Alexander gently turned the horse to face the sun, spoke softly to it, and calmly mounted the beast. Philip was so moved by this display of observation and courage that he reportedly kissed his son and said,
"Look for a kingdom equal to and worthy of yourself, for Macedonia is too small for you."
Yes, Father.
Bucephalus would become Alexander's most trusted companion, riding with him to the ends of the earth. But physical courage was not enough to rule. When Alexander was 13 years old, his father hired the greatest mind in Greece to be his personal tutor, the philosopher Aristotle. In the quiet sanctuary of Myesa, a village surrounded by green forest, Aristotle taught the teenage prince about medicine, philosophy, logic, and the geography of the world. Above all, he introduced Alexander to the Iliad, Homer's epic poem about the Trojan War. Alexander became obsessed with the tragic, glorious figure of Achilles. For the rest of his life, he would sleep with a copy of the Iliad and a dagger beneath his pillow. Alexander's childhood abruptly ended when he was 20 years old. In 336 BC, King Philip was assassinated at a grand wedding festival, stabbed by one of his own bodyguards. To this day, historians debate who ordered the murder, with many suspecting Olympias, his wife, or even Alexander himself, though no definitive proof exists. What is certain is how the young prince reacted. He did not hesitate. Within hours, he took over his father's throne and was proclaimed king. Over the next few weeks, he ruthlessly executed anyone who could challenge his claim to the throne, including his own relatives. He didn't want to show anyone that he is weak because of his age. When the southern Greek city of Thebes rebelled, thinking the young king was weak, Alexander marched his army south at lightning speed. He did not just defeat Thebes, he erased it. He ordered the city burned to the ground and sold 30,000 of its citizens into slavery. It was a calculated, terrifying message to the rest of Greece. The new king was far more dangerous than his father. With his homeland secured, Alexander turned his eyes eastward, toward the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire was a powerful kingdom unlike anything the world had ever known, stretching from modern-day Turkey to Pakistan. It possessed seemingly endless wealth and armies that outnumbered the Macedonians by massive margins. In 334 BC, at the age of 22, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the narrow water passage separating Europe from Asia. As his ship approached the Asian shore, he threw a spear into the sand, stepped onto the beach, and declared the continent his. "I accept Asia as a spear-won land, granted to me by the gods." He brought with him about 40,000 men. He also brought scientists, historians, and surveyors, treating the invasion not just as a war, but as a grand expedition of discovery. His ability to outthink his enemies became known almost immediately. At the Battle of the Granicus River, and later at the massive Battle of Issus, Alexander proved to be a master of reading the battlefield. He did not sit on a hill watching his men die. He rode at the very head of his elite cavalry, wearing a helmet with twin white plumes that made him a highly visible target. He would search for a weakness in the enemy line and then drive a wedge of cavalry directly into it with terrifying speed and violence. At Issus, his charge was so shocking that the Persian king, Darius III, panicked and fled the battlefield, leaving behind his own mother, wife, and daughters in his abandoned camp. Instead of chasing Darius deep into Persia immediately, Alexander marched down the Mediterranean coast to secure the naval ports. When the wealthy island city of Tyre refused to surrender, believing their high walls and deep waters made them invincible and untouchable, Alexander spent 7 painful months building a huge bridge of stone and timber through the sea itself to reach them. When the city finally fell, his revenge was merciless. Thousands were crucified along the beach. It was here that the world began to see the dual nature of Alexander, a man capable of stunning feats of engineering and intellect, but also capable of cold, planned massacre. From the ashes of Tyre, he marched into Egypt, where the Persian rule was so despised that the Egyptians welcomed the young Macedonian as a liberator. They crowned him pharaoh. But something far more profound happened in Egypt. Alexander took a dangerous journey deep into the Sahara Desert to visit the oracle of the god Amun at the Siwa oasis. When he emerged from the ancient temple, he claimed the high priest had addressed him as the son of gods. For a young man already raised on the myths of his mother, this was the moment the mortal king began to believe he was truly divine, and his destiny was to rule the world. In 331 BC, Alexander finally faced Darius III in the decisive Battle of Gaugamela in modern-day Iraq.
Darius had assembled an army so large it stretched beyond the horizon, complete with scythed chariots designed to cut infantry to pieces. But Alexander's tactical advantage shone again. He drew the Persian flanks out of position, created a gap in their lines, and launched a devastating cavalry strike straight at Darius. Once again, the Persian king fled. With the Persian army shattered, the great capitals of the ancient world fell into Alexander's hands. Babylon, with its towering temples and huge walls, surrendered without a fight. Susa yielded its immense treasuries. But when Alexander reached Persepolis, the spiritual heart of the Persian Empire, the dark side of his character erupted. After months of occupying the magnificent city, a massive fire broke out, destroying the ancient palaces. Some ancient historians claim it was a deliberate act of political revenge for the Persian invasion of Greece over a century earlier. Others say it was a disastrous result of a drunken party where Alexander, heavily intoxicated, threw the first torch. Whichever is true, the burning of Persepolis remains one of the great cultural tragedies of the ancient world. Alexander being drunk wouldn't be usual for a man like him. Okay, let's continue. Following the death of Darius, who was murdered by his own generals, Alexander was the undisputed king of Asia. But as his power expanded, his personality began to warp. The brilliant young commander began to adopt the customs of the Persian kings he had just defeated. He started wearing Persian clothing. Most shockingly to his Macedonian veterans, he demanded the practice of proskynesis, a Persian tradition where subjects had to bow down and kiss the ground before the king. To the Greeks, bowing was something you did only for the gods. To do it for a mortal man was deeply humiliating. Resentment began to boil. Paranoia soon infected Alexander's court. He began to see conspiracies everywhere.
When a plot against his life was uncovered, he learned that Philotas, the commander of his cavalry, had known about it but failed to warn him. Due to the lack of trust in people, Alexander did not just execute Philotas. He ordered the assassination of Philotas's father, Parmenion, a deeply respected general who had faithfully served both Alexander and his father. Parmenion was far away and completely innocent, but Alexander feared he might rebel upon hearing of his son's death. It was an act of cold-blooded political murder that shocked the army. But the most tragic display of his unstable mind occurred in the city of Maracanda in modern-day Uzbekistan. During a heavy night of drinking, a frequent and dangerous habit among the Macedonian elite, Alexander got into a shouting match with Cleitus the Black. Cleitus was one of his oldest commanders and the man who had personally saved Alexander's life at the Battle of the Granicus, chopping off the arm of a Persian soldier who was about to split Alexander's head open. Drunk and furious, Cleitus mocked Alexander, telling him he was nothing without his father's veterans and criticizing his adoption of Persian ways. Blind with rage, Alexander grabbed a spear and drove it through the chest of the man who had once saved him. The moment Cleitus fell, the alcohol seemed to evaporate from Alexander's mind. The realization of what he had done crushed him. He pulled the spear from his friend's body and tried to turn it on himself, but his guards restrained him. For days, the master of the world locked himself in his tent, weeping continuously, refusing food and water. He was a man capable of conquering nations, but utterly incapable of ruling his own passions. And this is where his mind started failing him. Despite the growing unrest, Alexander pushed his army further east, crossing the treacherous Hindu Kush mountains into India. In 326 BC, he fought his last great pitched battle at the Hydaspes River against the Indian king Porus. It was a terrifying engagement in the mud and rain against a wall of massive war elephants. Alexander's veterans, though terrified, managed to surround the beasts and win the day. But the victory came at a heavy cost. Many men died, and shortly after the battle, his beloved horse, Bucephalus, died of old age and exhaustion. Heartbroken, Alexander founded a city on the site and named it Bucephala. He wanted to keep going. He believed the Eastern Ocean, the edge of the world, was just a few marches away, but his men had reached their limit. Their clothes were rotting in the heavy humidity, their weapons were blunted, and they were deeply homesick. At the Beas River, they staged a quiet rebellion. They simply refused to march east. Alexander raged, threatened, and sat quietly in anger in his tent, but the army stood firm. For the first time in his life, Alexander had to retreat. Perhaps out of spite, or perhaps driven by a reckless desire to achieve what no one else had, Alexander chose to march a large portion of his army back to Babylon through the Gedrosian desert, a desolate, very hot wasteland in modern-day southern Pakistan. It was a catastrophic decision. The heat and lack of water destroyed his forces. Entire families of soldiers, along with camp followers, drowned in sudden flash floods or died of serious dehydration. More of his men died in the desert than in all of his battles combined. When he finally returned to the center of his empire, his mental state deteriorated further. His closest friend, his lifelong companion and rumored lover, Hephaestion, fell ill and died of a fever. Alexander's grief was apocalyptic. He executed Hephaestion's doctor, ordered that every horse in the empire have its mane and tail cut short. He also commanded the construction of a huge and incredibly expensive monument in Babylon.
By the spring of 323 BC, Alexander was in Babylon, planning a new naval campaign into Arabia. But the years of battle wounds, extreme physical exhaustion, his unstable mind, and heavy drinking had finally taken their toll. Following a long night of feasting, Alexander collapsed with a sudden, raging fever. For nearly 2 weeks, his condition worsened. He lost the ability to speak. Knowing the end was near, his hardened veterans, the men who had bled for him across 3 continents, filed past his bed one by one, weeping as they said goodbye to their silent king. According to legend, in his final moments, his generals leaned in close and asked him to whom he left his massive empire. The dying king forced out a single fateful whisper, "To the strongest." Alexander the Great died on June 11, 323 BC. He was only 32 years old. His final words were a curse. Almost immediately after his last breath, his generals turned on one another. The greatest empire the world had ever seen fractured into warring kingdoms, launching decades of bloody conflict known as the Wars of the Successors. Alexander's bloodline was entirely wiped out in the chaos. His mother, his wife, and his young son were all murdered in the struggle for power. Yet, despite the collapse of his empire, Alexander's legacy fundamentally altered the course of human history. He had effectively erased the borders of the ancient world. The Greek language, art, and philosophy he carried with him took root across the Middle East and Central Asia. The city he founded on the coast of Egypt, Alexandria, would become the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean, housing the great library and shining as a beacon of learning for centuries. Alexander the Great remains one of history's most mesmerizing paradoxes. He was a student of philosophy who committed acts of barbaric cruelty. He was a visionary who sought to unite different cultures, yet he left a legacy of war and fractured kingdoms. He was a man who achieved more in a single decade than most civilizations achieved in centuries, and was called Alexander the Great, only to discover that the world was too vast for any one mortal to hold.
In the end, his story is a soaring, tragic reminder of the boundless heights of human potential and the destructive consequences of ambition without limits. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the forgotten history. If you enjoyed discovering the stories of ancient civilizations, historical figures, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us as we continue uncovering the hidden chapters of human history. Until our next journey into the past, remember, every civilization has a story waiting to be told.